also joining this evening's live stream, both provided by Minuteman Media Network, who always do an amazing job broadcasting town events. My name is Shari Morrison. Rick Gianmartino and I are the co-chairs of the Concord Carlisle Human Rights Council, and we are honored to once again be co-sponsoring tonight's annual Holocaust Remembrance with the town of Concord. I'd like to start by thanking council members Ronnie Olitsky and Sarah Napier for organizing this event. It's a lot of work, and every year they do an amazing job, and always with a smile. Thank you very much, Ronnie and Sarah. There are currently 2 internationally recognized Holocaust Days of Remembrance. In 1951, the Israeli Parliament designated the 14th of Nisan on the Hebrew calendar as the Israeli Holocaust Remembrance Day. Called Yom HaShoah in Hebrew, it marks the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. In 2005, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution designating January 27th as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. This day was chosen to commemorate the liberation of Auschwitz complex of concentration and extermination camps by the Red Army. Both of these days are times to remember the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust, as well as the millions of non-Jewish victims who were targeted by the Nazi regime. Each year, in honor of Holocaust Remembrance, the town of Concord designates a period of time in which to remember and acknowledge the past and to recommit ourselves to building a stronger, more compassionate community for all. The Select Board votes to issue a proclamation for these days of remembrance. Tonight is not just the beginning of this year's week of remembrance in Concord, but also the beginning of Yom HaShoah, the Israeli Day of Remembrance. To speak on behalf of the Select Board and read the proclamation, I'd like to introduce Selectman Mark Howell.
Thank you. Welcome to the town of Concord. Welcome to the town hall. My name is Mark Howell, speaking for the Select Board, and it's my honor to read this proclamation to you on this important day. A proclamation for days of remembrance of the victims of the Holocaust. Whereas the Holocaust was the state-sponsored systematic persecution and annihilation of European Jewry by Nazi Germany and its collaborators between 1933 and 1945, 6 million were murdered. Roma Gypsies, people with disabilities, and Poles were also targeted for destruction or decimation for racial, ethnic, or national reasons. And millions more, including homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, Soviet prisoners of war, and political dissidents also suffered grievous oppression and death under Nazi tyranny. And whereas the history of the Holocaust offers an opportunity to reflect on the moral responsibilities of individuals, societies, and governments, and whereas we, the people of Concord, should always remember the terrible events of the Holocaust and the genocides of Armenia, Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, and Darfur, we all have a duty to use these memories as a catalyst to rid us of racial hatred, intolerance, tyranny, and discrimination. And whereas we, the people of Concord, should actively rededicate ourselves to the principles of individual freedom and just society, and whereas May 6, 2024 has been designated pursuant to an act of Congress and internationally as a day of remembrance for the victims of the Nazi Holocaust known as Yom HaShoah, and whereas it is appropriate for the people of Concord to join the international commemoration, and now therefore we, the Concord Select Board, call for a memorial service for the victims today, Sunday, May 5th, 2024 at 7 p.m. and proclaim a week of May 5th through May 11th, 2024 as Days of Remembrance for the victims of the Holocaust. Signed, the Concord Select Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Selectman Howell. I would now like to introduce Cantor Rosalie Garut of Kerem Shalom for welcoming remarks.
What we just presented was outstanding and heartfelt. Thank you so much. As some of you know, my parents were Holocaust survivors. My mother was a slave laborer in Lodz, Poland, lost her family, lived with one sister, transferred to Auschwitz, and they were prisoners endured starvation and torture by their captors. She was eventually liberated by the Russians. My father was in the ghetto of Vilna, Lithuania, from which he escaped into the woods to join
The
the
microphone be louder. Is it possible?
I can speak louder. Actually, I can speak without a microphone. I thought this was carrying through. Do you want me to start again? Okay. Do you want me to start again, or okay? You can keep going. Okay. My father was in the ghetto of Vilna, Lithuania. He escaped to join the partisans. He went into the woods, and there he was shot and taken to Dachau. And he survived through the forced march out of Dachau, the end of the war. And I think if they and many others who endured these atrocities, and for the places that you mentioned, could be here with us now, they would be in tears, as I feel. Deeply grateful for this outstanding community of Concord, for the horrors and sadness of this time we recognize each year with care and understanding. On behalf of all of those who have endured and continue to endure unimaginable suffering, we send our prayers and our hopes for the time when our beautiful earth will find and be at peace. Amen.
Thank you, Cantor Rosalie. We are honored to welcome Werner Salinger as tonight's speaker. Born in Berlin, Werner and his family fled Germany in 1939 after witnessing Kristallnacht, the infamous Night of Broken Glass, eventually settled in Princeton, New Jersey. Werner has had a long and distinguished career, working as an intelligence officer in the United States Air Force during the Cold War, and later as the executive director of the Concord-based Greeley Foundation for Peace and Justice. He's traveled around the world, lecturing on topics ranging from the impacts of globalization to the intricacies and joy of deepwater sailing. Werner is a former resident of Marlborough, but has strong ties to Concord. His daughter, Lynn, is a resident of Concord, and his two grandsons are graduates of Concord Carlisle High School. Werner has agreed to take your questions after his presentation, so please save them, and Rich will come up and facilitate the Q&A. Please join me now in welcoming Werner Salinger.
Let's see if I can get this right. Okay, well, first of all, thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Ronnie and Sarah, for the invitation. They vetted me pretty closely about what my connections were to Concord. Daughter Lynn was actually, I think, for a while, the FinCom chair here. And as was said, her two sons, our grandsons, are both graduates of Concord Carlisle High School, now both PhD recipients, working in the greater Boston area. Thank you to the Select Board for the proclamation that you read. I'm here to tell you the story of my experience with the Holocaust. As was said, I was born in Berlin, which was then in April 1932, which was then the capital of Germany, and is again, of course, today the capital of Germany. 10 months after my birth was the epic event of Adolf Hitler coming to power in Germany. He was appointed by then President Paul Hindenburg. He was not elected at that time, appointed. Make a note of that. And when he came to power, a year after he came to power, President Hindenburg died, 1934, and Adolf Hitler became the sole political leader of Germany. I wish that we had had a Declaration of Human Rights back in the 1930s. Maybe we could have avoided the Holocaust. Unfortunately, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights didn't come about until the 10th of December, 1948. I don't know how well it's been enforced around the world in which we live, but at least we have a Declaration of Human Rights, which we didn't have then. So thank you all for coming to the Human Rights Council in Concord tonight. I don't know if you're all members, but I'm sure most of you are. And I have connections to Concord through Ruth Salinger, who's here tonight, who was one of the founders of this organization, along with Dr. Willie. Knew Dr. Willie pretty well when I was the director of the Greeley Foundation. Our office is around the corner here, and Dr. Willie for a while was chair of our board as well. So those are my Concord connections. I think they're good enough for me to be here tonight. One of the first things that Adolf Hitler did after he came to power in 1934, when Hindenburg died, was he created a committee of about a dozen very high-level Nazis. I think they were all men in those days. That was pretty common. And he sent them overseas to study other countries' racial laws, because he had been committed, and it was pretty widely known about his hatred of the Jews, and his hate, because he wrote the book Mein Kampf, and in it made no bones about the fact that he hated Jews and wanted to get rid of them. Of course, anti-Semitism was not a local thing to the Germans. It had been pretty active throughout most of Europe for hundreds of years before the Holocaust. But Hitler, like perhaps some people we know in this country now, came to power and created a milieu, if you will, that brought to the Germans, who were still reeling from severe inflation and the results of the Versailles Treaty of the First World War. It was pretty easy to rile them up. Anti-Semitism was the way he did it. So he sent this committee to other countries to study their racial laws, and the very first country he sent them to was the United States of America, because we had our own racial laws. We had Jim Crow that discriminated heavily against people of color. We had the Asian Exclusionary Act of 1882. So these people who were here for about 9 to 10 months studied those laws, went back to Germany. Several of them wrote books about it. And the result of all that were the racial laws of 1935, which are called the Nuremberg Laws, which described who was a citizen or who could be a citizen of Germany and who could not. And they were published by the Nazi Parliament on the 15th of September in 1935. And immediately, overnight, life for Jews, of which there were at least 100,000 in Berlin at the time, became very different. By strange coincidence, I saw the play Cabaret again last night in Wayland. I currently live in Wayland. And of course, if you've ever seen Cabaret, you know that overnight, people who were citizens of Germany one day were not Germans the next. That becomes pretty evident in the second act of the Cabaret. In my case, my parents were both professional people. My mother was one of the world's first orthodontists, 1920s and 30s, was a pretty hip lady. She used a hyphenated last name. Dr. Helen Mark Salinger in the 1920s and the 1930s. She was also a guitar-playing 17-year-old. I know that because I have a picture of her. I didn't know her very long. We came to the States in February 1939, and she unfortunately contracted tuberculosis on board the ship and died within 10 months of our being here. So I never really saw her after my 7th birthday, but I know that she was a very liberal person. My father was an attorney, and the Nuremberg laws decreed that immediately professional people, whether they were medical people or lawyers, could only continue to have clients or patients that were Jewish. They could no longer, overnight, they could no longer administer medicine or legal advice to non-Jewish German people. That was a huge change, of course, for them. It affected me in terms of attending kindergarten. I immediately had to go to an all-Jewish school. It was a pretty awkward experience for me, but that's what happened. Immediately, within the next day. I consider my mother a Holocaust victim. She died because of what happened to her on the ship. My two best friends, whose names were Rudy and Renata, they were brother and sister, my age. Rudy and Renata Shepsis, and their mother, all three of them went up in smoke, one of the 6 million. Their father happened to be a doctor, and he happened to survive Theresienstadt. I have two grandparents who survived both Dachau and Theresienstadt and came to live with us in Baltimore when I was about 13, 14, after their experience in the camps. And as was said in the introduction, I think, I experienced Kristallnacht, which happened about 3 years after 1935, after the racial laws were publicized, were passed by the Nazi Parliament. On the night of the 8th to the 9th of November 1938 was the night of Kristallnacht. The one we just passed was actually the 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht. I remember it very well. We had an apartment right in the middle of Berlin on Ulandstrasse, corner of Kudamm. Have you been to Berlin, right? Anyone else here know that intersection? There you go. My mother's dental practice was around the corner on Blanktorstrasse. But we lived on Ulandstrasse, on the corner of Kudamm. And it was a second floor apartment, very large really, because my mother's dental practice was there as well. And I had a great perch from our second floor window looking down. There happened to be a kind of a strip mall across the street, so I witnessed the shards of glass in the street, a few bodies in the street. But my most vivid memory is of the dark, acrid smoke that hung over the neighborhood, and still hangs in my mind, really. And that was caused by the synagogue burning in Fasanenstrasse, which was just 1 block away. So that's my memory of Kristallnacht on November 1938 to November 8th to 9th, 1938. We were lucky to get a visa to come to the United States, but you need more than a visa. What else do you need? You need an affidavit of support from someone who already is a citizen of the United States, who will testify and sign under oath that he or she will support you and your family should you need it, and you will never become a burden to the taxpayer of the United States. That's pretty common. It's still practiced, I think, today. And we had a little trouble. We had a lot of trouble, actually, getting that affidavit. And we finally got it through the good graces of a man named Carl Lemley. That name register with anybody? Carl Lemley came to this country as a German refugee, not because of the Holocaust, in the very early years of the 20th century. I think it was 1903 or 04. He came here as a 17-year-old, struggled for about 10 years, and then found his way into the American movie industry, and became one of the founders of Universal Studios. So in that process, he became quite wealthy. He was from a mid-sized city in sort of in the middle of Germany named Laupheim. And he, when the Holocaust ratcheted up, he decided that he would do whatever he could do to help any family that had connections to Laupheim, Germany. My mother was one of 5 sisters, and her oldest sister was fortunately married to a man who was from Laupheim, Germany, and that's why they got their visas, and they came here in 36 or 37. My parents evidently had no other one to turn to other than Carl Lindley, and tried by asking him again to provide that affidavit to the Salinger, 3 Salingers, Dr. Hilda Mark Salinger, Kurt Salinger, and me. And he said, no, I really have done this too many times. The State Department has cautioned me not to do it again, and so I really can't. Fortunately, I had an uncle in New York, and Carl Lindley had a little apartment in New York, and my uncle confronted him and said, I don't care what you do, but you got to do this one more time for the 3 Salingers. And he did, and otherwise I probably would not be standing here before you this evening. That's how close we came. There was another event, of course, after we were actually already here in the States, and it's called the Wannsee Conference. And have you heard of that? Yes. Yeah? And you know what happened there? They thought they found the final solution to the final solution. And they met for one day in a villa on Lake Wannsee, which is a lake just outside of Berlin. You've probably been there, right? Oh yeah. They met there for one day, again about a dozen people. A high-ranking SS officer named Reinhard Heinrich called the meeting. It was the 20th of January, 1942. And in that one day, they decided how they would kill not 6 million, but 11 million people. They had taken a pretty careful census of the Jewish population, not just in the countries they had already conquered, but in the countries in Eastern Europe that they felt sure that they would be conquering. And in one day, on the 20th of January, 1942, they decided how to kill 11 million people. That's when they came up with the gas procedure. And the 2 major concerns that came out of that Wannsee meeting on the 20th of January 1942 were, 1, the logistics of how to get 11 million people to the killing sites in the middle of a war that they were involved in with the Soviet Union at the time. But they figured it out. They figured it out, and they decided, okay, it might be difficult, but we'll find a way. And the other major concern on the 20th of January 1942 was what psychological effect could it have on the German soldiers ordered to do the killing. Those were the 2 major concerns at a conference that decided how to kill 11 million people. I hate to say fortunately, but fortunately they only got to 6. So when my mother came down with TB, and she was 7 or 8 months before she died, I was immediately sent away to live with relatives in Princeton, New Jersey. I had an uncle who was married to my father's first cousin, who of course was Jewish. She was, he wasn't. He was a world-renowned Presbyterian New Testament theologian and taught at the Princeton Theological Seminary. So I got to live with Uncle Odo. Odo Peter was his name. And down the street lived Albert Einstein, just about 6 houses away. My uncle and Albert Einstein knew each other because they both received honorary degrees from the Sorbonne in Paris on the same day in the 1920s. My grandmother, Albert Einstein, had a secretary or an administrator, or I don't know what she was to him, but she lived in the Einstein house. Her name was Mrs. Duca, T-U-K-A, Frau Duca. She was from Freiburg, Germany. My grandmother was from Freiburg, Germany, and my grandmother knew Frau Duca almost from the instant of her birth. So when my grandmother would come to visit me in Princeton, we would walk down to the Einstein house, just 6 houses away, and if Albert Einstein was there, he would take me by the hand and walk me through his garden, and then back to his study, take his violin off the wall and play his violin for me. You probably haven't yet met a person who knew Albert Einstein personally. I went back to Germany in 1951. Only this time I was wearing a U.S. Air Force blue, as was it Sherry who introduced me?
Yes.
Yeah, mentioned. And because my father insisted that I speak German as I was growing up, which was not common for Jewish refugee families, a lot of them did not want anything else to do with anything German, but my father insisted that I speak German, and I did. And so I spoke fluent German, and the Air Force decided I'd make a great intelligence officer in Germany. And I did, and I spent 3.5 years there doing that, and doing mostly interrogation work. I'm talking about the years 51, 52, 53, 54. What was happening at that time? We were at the very height of the Cold War. We were, all of us were sure that we would be going to war with the Soviet Union, not tomorrow or the next day, but any minute this afternoon. And I was stationed right up on the border. The International Red Cross had discovered that the Soviets were still holding a number of German POWs, and they ordered them sent back to Germany. And as they came back, we interviewed them, some of them for many days and even weeks, because they had been involved in the rebuilding of the Soviet Union, and we knew very little about the new Soviet Union that had been so destroyed in World War II, but these guys had been involved in the rebuilding of it, and we were able to get a lot of information from them. They knew how long the runways were in the new airfields. They knew what kind of steel was used in the new bridges. They knew how thick the factory walls were in the new factories, all that kind of stuff. And we gathered that information and sent it back to the Pentagon so they could make the bombing folders necessary to destroy it all again when the war with the Soviet Union would come, as we all expected. Well, fortunately, that has not yet happened. I was in Germany for 3.5 years. When the flow of returning POWs stopped, we interviewed or interrogated defectors who came across the Iron Curtain, Winston Churchill's Iron Curtain. And the whole program was called Operation Ringer. No waterboarding. Operation Ringer. Got a lot of information. About a year into my German tour, I decided to look for a young German woman, pretty young German woman, to see the rest of Europe with. And I found her and fell in love with her and married her. And she happened to be the daughter of a Nazi soldier. That's a stunner, right? Yeah. And we're still married, 72 years later. 4 kids, 6 grandkids, and 6 grandkids later. And that's kind of my story. And I'll be glad to take your questions.
So just so people online can hear, I'm going to hand you a microphone if you have any questions. Anybody have any questions? Oh, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to see you standing here. I lost family in the Holocaust. Anyway, I'm curious, your children, your grandchildren, your great-children, what do they know about your story and about Judaism?
That's a good question, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, neither my wife and I were very religious. And so we didn't have any, and neither were my parents. We were really secular Jews, as was kind of the normal among German Jewry, except perhaps in the far eastern part of Germany where it was more in the old religious style. But all our kids know about Judaism. Actually, my wife came from the Lutheran family, and I, of course, came from the Jewish family. So when our oldest daughter got to be about 5 years old, we discovered the Unitarian congregations. And that's pretty much what the kids went through as they were growing up. The only one who still belongs to the Unitarian congregation is the one here in Concord, Lynn, our oldest, who is going to be 69 on the 4th of July. She's the 4th of July, too. I never thought I'd have a 69-year-old daughter, but anyway, I do. I do have a connection to Kerem Shalom here, because I was the fundraising consultant that helped build Kerem Shalom. So are members here from Kerem Shalom? Yeah, a lot. Okay, well, I remember when you guys were at the First Parish Church before the building was built, and I was the fundraiser that helped your colleagues raise the money to build Kerem Shalom. I'm very proud of that, actually. Anyone else? Yes?
In the movie Oppenheimer, there's a lingering question of the conversation that Oppenheimer had with Albert Einstein. What do you and Albert Einstein talk about?
Well, I guarantee you it wasn't about the hydrogen bomb or the atomic bomb. But Albert Einstein taught at the the Institute of Science, I forget the real name, in Princeton. Of advanced study, right. And at the university, and my uncle taught at the seminary. My conversation with Albert Einstein was, you know, he loved kids. I was just a kid. I was 7, 8, 9 years old. He lost me on the first equation.
So I'm curious, I've never actually thought of this till now. Did you, once you were growing up, seek out as an adult to know other people who had escaped or survived the Holocaust? Do people get together? Or is it still a kind of individual and separate experience?
Well, I just finished spending 30 years in Arizona as a snowbird. And while in Arizona, I belonged to the Phoenix Holocaust Association. As a matter of fact, I was a board member of the Phoenix Holocaust Association. And there's also an organization in Arizona called the Arizona Jewish Historical Society. So we are connected in Arizona to about 70 survivors that still live down there. And very active. And Arizona, like Massachusetts, has a legislative mandate to teach students about the Holocaust between grades 7 and 12 2 times. And the same thing's true here in Massachusetts. Between grades 7 and grades 12, they have to be taught 2 times. And we work very actively down there to make sure that's enforced, giving teacher conferences and things like that. So in Arizona, I knew a lot of the 70 people, and there are events that go on a monthly basis that brings survivors together. I haven't yet found my way into that community here in the greater Boston area, although I work closely with Debbie Colton at the Lappin Foundation, which is a foundation committed to Holocaust kinds of work.
If it's not too personal, I'm just curious, when you first met your wife, what was the relationship with her father like?
Well, that's a good question. When I first met my wife, it took 3 or 4 months for me to get a... First of all, you should know that the intelligence work I did required me to be in civilian clothes. So when I first met her at a dance, I was in a suit and tie and tried to not seem to be an American intelligence officer, although I had a crew cut, pretty much like you did. And that kind of gave me away. But we didn't discuss the Jewish question. I always felt that if I told her that and if she knew that, that might end the relationship. I was kind of afraid to do that. When I did tell her, she said, yeah, I knew that all along. That's not a problem. And as far as my father-in-law is concerned, I do a lot of speaking in schools. I did in Arizona, and I'm doing that again here. And almost always the kids ask me, how did you get along with your father-in-law? I have a very simple answer. He loved me and I loved him.
When you were growing up, did your folks talk about that year that they spent in Berlin before you emigrated, and how the bystanders and their neighbors absorbed the fact that they were being excluded from German life?
Yes, my father had a very close call with the Gestapo, actually. My father had a law partner, a Jewish law partner after the Nuremberg laws, of course, and they had an office in the very center of Berlin. And fortunately, the building had a front stairway and a back stairway. And also, fortunately, there was a woman in the building. She was the superintendent of the building. She was very courageous. And one day, 3 Gestapo men came looking for him. And she ran up the front stairway, warned him. And although he was not normally a person to make very quick decisions, he made a quick one that day. And he got out of the building via the back stairway. He came back, he was gone for 10 days. And then he came back to me. I was 6 at the time, 6 years old. And he told me he'd been away on a business trip. He actually was at his mother's house, apartment, hiding out. Why they didn't go there to find him, I don't know. I can only, I imagine that they had lists of people to arrest, and if the person they were not looking for was not there, they just went on to the next person, because they never went after him at his mother's house. But he came back to me and to home and told me he had been to Hamburg on a business trip. And to validate that story, he brought me a collection of beautiful German ship models. And I have been a ship enthusiast ever since. Yes, sir.
In your opinion, how does the psychotic hatred of one man, Hitler, for Jews and other people expand to a point where other people develop a plan to murder 11 million human beings?
Well, fortunately, the U.S. Army stopped that in 1945, or it might well have spread. And it did in fact. There were countries, Ukraine is a good example. A lot of Jews were killed by Ukrainian people. Poland is another example. I think if it had not been stopped by the Allies, we would have seen a much higher figure approaching the 11 million they were looking that answer your question? Yeah.
Are there any more questions? Moving on.
I was wondering if you have brought either your children and or grandchildren back to your town in Germany.
Oh, yes, we have. We visited Dachau and Theresienstadt. Oh, yes. We have done that.
Okay, hold on. I think we have time for 2 more questions. I was wondering if your father talked about how his parents had been changed by their experience in the concentration camp, or his in-laws, I'm not sure which set of grandparents were in the concentration camps. Were they changed by it, or were they the same grandparents you had before?
I didn't quite understand the question. Were they what?
How were they changed by their experience in the concentration camps?
My grandparents?
As your grandparents, when you first knew them, maybe you knew them when you were in Germany as a little boy?
No, I never knew them before the war.
Okay.
They were actually my stepmother's parents. So when I did meet them in 1946, they were wonderful, very quiet people. We never got to talk. My fault. I should have been much more inquisitive. But my grandfather, who lived to be almost 101, was a very religious person. We always celebrated Shabbat Shalom. After he came, we had seders and all, much more Jewish religiousness. And his artifacts that he brought with him, his prayer book, things like that, are now up in Gloucester at the Gloucester Temple in the display case. I just came back from 40 years of living on the North Shore in Gloucester and Rockport. So anyway, that's where they are. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could say a little more about your time interviewing the former German soldiers, and particularly like how you dealt with the emotional impact that you must have had, or I assume you had, in working with them after the war.
Well, it was emotional at first, but I got to understand, these guys had been in captivity, some of them for 10, 12, 15 years. They had established relationships with Russian women, had common law marriages, had children. These were the survivors of the hundreds of thousands of German prisoners of war, most of whom never made it, they died in captivity. But these guys, by the time I got to talk to them in 51 and 2 and 3, I didn't really see them anymore as German army veterans. They were just people who had been in captivity for a long time. We also hired German men to help in the interrogation effort. We had probably a dozen or so German veterans, all of them veterans of the German armed forces. Some of them might have been SS people, I don't know. But we worked with them as colleagues, and that's just the way it was.
Okay, one more question, this time over here.
When you brought your children to, I guess, Dachau, you said, and Theresienstadt, how old were they and what was their reaction?
I think when we took the whole family in 1970, our oldest was 15, the next was 13, our son was probably 10 or 11. They were all very emotionally affected by visiting Dachau and Theresienstadt. Yeah.
I can imagine.
It affected them greatly.
Thank you.
Okay, can you handle more questions? Because
Sure.
people are very interested.
That's fine.
I
I just wondered, what do you think about the anti-Semitism now? Its rise, where do you think it'll land? What do you think we should do to, prevent?
About anti-Semitism now? We should try to do what the Germans did not do. That is, react. Never let it pass. Always, when I talk to the kids, I always say, be upstanders, not bystanders. Get involved. Do something on your own. Run for office, which I did in Marlborough. Ruth and I were on school boards at the same time. She here in Concord and I in Marlborough. You got to fight it. When I drive through Germany, and I go to Germany a lot, especially while my wife's parents were still alive, every German town and village that you drive through, every single one has at least 2 churches in it. A Protestant church and a Catholic church. And still, the Holocaust happened. And the world stood by, basically. Even we in the United States. This country did not have a great record in accepting Jewish refugees. Matter of fact, there was a very low quota for German Jewish refugees to come here. I have no idea how we got the quota. I know how we got the affidavit, but not how we got the quota. But we got the visa. And my father never practiced law again. Of course, he was left with a 7-year-old kid, single parent in a country where he, in a brand new country where he barely knew the language.
You're very popular.
I loved your sentence, he loved me and I loved him. And that sort of says to me what I love about the Jewish culture. That you continue to be the object of hate for thousands and thousands of years and continue to rise. But I still, as I sit and I listen, and it's a very existential question, I'm sure, but I wonder, like, what is it? Why do people choose the Jews? What is your, like, I'm sure every Jew has their own particular...
That's the ultimate question, isn't it?
It just puzzles me beyond belief that one culture, and the only thing I can think of is I think about World War II, and I grew up in New York, so I grew up around a lot of Jewish people, and I know many survivors, and I just think that, are they jealous?
I think that's part of it, yes.
It's a culture that
jealous.
It just kind of, it doesn't have the denial that a lot of cultures have. It's in my outside personal opinion. But it's kind of like, that's done. He loved me, I loved him. And we go on with your life. You go on with your life. And it's remarkable. I mean, that Israel exists and that it is such a country of innovation and all kinds of things. And Jews all over, some of the greatest philanthropists in the country. Most progressive people I know, and so I just, it saddens me beyond anything, but if there's a book you think I should read, I'll read it. But I would love your personal opinion, if you have one.
Personal what?
Your personal opinion, if you have one.
Well, Jews have, historically, we've always been driven from country to country. I mean, you can look at the Spanish Inquisition by itself. 800 to 1200 AD, I guess. We're driven out of countries. We're easy picks. We're a small group, for one thing. And jealousy, I think, plays a big role in it. I think it did in Germany, because a relatively high percentage of the Jewish population of Germany were pretty upscale professional people. So I think that did play a role in it. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Salinger.
Oh, you're welcome.
you're going to come up here and grace us again with the music. Yeah, where is it?
You brought a lot of things up in my mind as you spoke. One thing I wanted to say is, if anyone's interested, Karen Shalom is going to be offering a course in anti-Semitism. So you can learn about the history and the details, and they start next Tuesday. So karamshalom.org, you'll find information. The teacher is very knowledgeable. I can answer some of these questions. And you know, being the daughter of survivors dealing with the legacy and the impact, I ended up joining with other people from the other side to create an organization called One by One International. And when I did that, we ended up talking with people from the other side. The German children of the Nazis, children of people who escaped, people, and then we went into Rwanda, Cambodia, Serbia, Guatemala, Peru. We met with Native Americans, and now we have some other people that want to deal with with the opposite sides. And it gave me inspiration, made meaning out of the suffering. And what I wanted to say was, my mother, when she was in Auschwitz, it was so horrible with all the beatings and starvation and all. She took her one surviving younger sister to go to the electric wires and die. And there was an angel on the other side. We never knew his name. But this man said, "No, what are you doing?" And she said, "I can't take it anymore." He said, "Wait, wait," gave her cigarettes. He said, go trade this for food, and I'll meet you here again. And I'm alive because of this angel, this lovely Christian Polish man. So it's possible if we can interact and find some peace. So One by One, I wrote a song, and I thought I'd share it. My heart is relieved because you came to be with me. I have wandered through the years and cried my tears in many lands, through the deserts and the hatred. I hope it's not too late. I'm looking for the gates to the garden of peace. In this moment, in this time, I need your hand inside of mine. I know the worlds we have seen are parched by hate, but still we dream of a time when we will find that all the things we call divine can be here. Let's build a garden of peace. There are people who will say we are blind, we've lost our way, and nothing can bring back the time of innocence again. We've got to dream, we've got to believe that there's enough here for you and for me. We'll share the bounties of this earth, its richness is our gift since birth. So here now we've come together. Isn't it time to let the light shine in? With open hearts and weeping souls, we can begin to find the road, turn our lives from darkness and destruction, and hold a vision of a loving creation. Let's take the children into a garden of peace.
and gentlemen, esteemed guests, dear friends, as we come to the conclusion of this solemn yet profoundly important gathering, we want to extend our deepest gratitude to each and every one of you for being here today. Your presence, your empathy, your commitment to remembrance are testaments to the enduring power of humanity's collective will to reflect on and learn from the past. We want to express our heartfelt appreciation to our distinguished guest, Mr. Salinger. Thank you. For sharing your harrowing yet invaluable first-hand account of living through one of the darkest chapters of modern human history. Your courage in revisiting those painful memories and your willingness to educate and inspire us are nothing short of extraordinary. Your words will echo in our hearts and minds long after this event concludes. So thank you. More thank yous. Thank you to Minuteman Media for recording and making this event available online and to cable viewers as well. Thank you to Mark Howell. Thank you for reading the proclamation and the select board. Rosalie, thank you for your words and your wonderful music. I've heard that music is a ladder for the soul, and you've uplifted us. Thank you. And again, a big thank you to Ronnie and Sarah for your efforts. Your hard work made this event truly special. So today, as we remember the millions who perished in the Holocaust and honor the indomitable spirit of those who survived, let us also reaffirm that the town of Concord, the Concord Human Rights Council, and many other organizations in town and its citizens stand firmly committed to the principles of justice, equity, and human dignity. Together we pledge to confront hatred, bigotry, and intolerance wherever they may arise, and stand in solidarity with those who are persecuted or marginalized. In this collaborative effort, we honor not only the memory of the Holocaust victims, but also uphold the values that define our community and guide us towards a more just and compassionate society. In the face of unspeakable evil, it is easy to lose hope. But let us remember that even in the darkest of times, there are beacons of light, acts of courage, compassion, and kindness that remind us of the inherent goodness within humanity. Let us draw together from these examples and strive to be agents of positive change in our communities and beyond. And I'll give a little plug here and say that if you're interested in being part of the Concord Carlisle Human Rights Council, please speak up and come forward. Thank you. Thank you once again for joining us here today. May peace and blessings be upon us all. Thank you very much.
It's good of you to come out in the rain. I said it was good